Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to knock out the CFI fundamentals of instruction, and we're going to go down the line through every single technical subject area that is relevant to the oral exam guide for CFIs. This is just going to be a very comprehensive guide. It's going to be the most comprehensive guide that you will ever hear on YouTube, likely, unless somebody outdoes me. If you do, bravo, congratulations, because I'm about to sit here for several hours and talk. We're going to go part by part, and we're going to start with the fundamentals of instruction. So let's go ahead and get started. So the effects of human behavior and communication on the learning process. So what's the definition of human behavior? Human behavior is the product of factors that cause people to act in predictable ways. It can be also defined as the result of a person's attempt to satisfy certain needs. And this goes back to our Maslow's hierarchy, which we'll get into here in a minute. So why is this important as a flight instructor to understand? Why do flight instructors need to understand human behavior? Well, to effectively teach, you need to be able to understand human behavior to then gather the knowledge to understand yourself as an instructor and the needs of the learner, which we'll also get into. Understanding human behavior will always lead to successful instruction. So what are some examples of maybe some behavior that humans could be showing to you as an instructor that you should be able to pick up on and understand that it could be affecting their motivation or their ability to learn? Well, a couple of these things could be something bad has happened to them, right? Or maybe something good, right? So maybe they had a death in the family or a divorce, or maybe they're doing terribly in school, or they just can't pass a stage check at your flight school. A learner may also have a fear, right? So he or she might be scared of doing power on, power off stalls. Maybe one day they got into an inadvertent spin. These are things that you have to take into account as an instructor. All learners are different, and people will never learn or require the same things to learn as another learner may need or not need. So why does personality type affect instructors and learners? Well, based on a personality type, everyone has an individual style of learning, just like every instructor has a different way of teaching. So it's important that as instructors, we recognize that all learners are different and that we accustom and modify our syllabus, our instructions to that specific learner. So let's briefly talk on motivation. So motivation is a need or a desire that causes a person to act or do something, right? The FAA has defined motivation as tangible, intangible, or subtle or obvious, right? So generally, what I would do as an instructor, and what I assume that most instructors do, is you just flat out ask, hey, so why do you want to be a pilot, right? Since day one, you want to gather as much information about this individual, this unique learner, right, that are all different, and kind of assess, hey, so what's got you into aviation? Why are you maybe not ask directly what motivates you, but maybe you can, depending on the type of learner, I'm pretty straightforward. If my instructor said, hey, so why are you motivated to be a pilot? Why do you want to be a pilot, pretty much, is the question I got from pretty much all my new instructors. So figuring out motivation is very important, because if, let's just say, the learner isn't motivated, or he's just like, oh, I just want to impress my friends, or, oh, this girl, that I really like, she wants to be a pilot too, and I want to do it too. That may not satisfy the learner's needs, which we'll get into later, but this may not be enough to keep the learner motivated for their long-term success or goals. So why is it important to understand what motivates a learner? In general, motivation is going to be the dominant force that essentially governs the learner's process and the ability to understand information. And it's important that as an instructor, in order to maintain motivation and progress, is that you make every lesson a pleasant experience, have the learner enjoy being there with you, and, also have a sense of structure. So, hey, we did really good today with our power off, power on stalls. Next, we're going to get into slow flight, and we can get into, well, hopefully you already covered slow flight. That's just an example. You do X, which will allow you to move on to Y and Z, right? So you building blocks, and then you motivate the learner by saying, hey, really good job. Essentially, what the FAA says is giving praise when it is due, but it's also important that you emphasize the bad and that you correct those mistakes, because that goes into the law of primacy, right? So what's first learned is best remembered. So if you intentionally teach something good and they learn this item, and they show that they have learned this item properly and correctly and up to standards and how they should be, it's important that, you praise that behavior. But if it's bad behavior, you cannot praise that, because that will interfere with the law of primacy, which means that what's first learned is best remembered. And if you teach them something wrong and you give praise when it's not due, well, guess what? Then they're just going to remember how to do this bad thing that they should have never learned in the first place, because the positive transfer never was achieved. So as instructors, we want to avoid negative transfer, because that's just not good on the learner. And again, like I said, it's going to be harder to unlearn something that was learned the first time around. So then we get into negative motivation and positive motivation. So negative motivation can cause fear. It could be very bad for a learner, but something like me, negative motivation could or was useful in certain situations. But it's not as effective, generally speaking, as efficient or in promoting efficient learning as positive motivation. And positive motivation is generally provided by the promise or achievement of rewards. So, these rewards can be social, they can be personal, they can involve like a financial gain. So like, becoming a CFI finally, or, maybe the satisfaction of self-concept, personal gain, or, sounding cool around those around you. But to end off on that note, it's generally important that you understand and that you find out why the learner is motivated to become a pilot or to learn whatever it is that you're doing in that moment. So what happens if your learner just shows up completely unprepared? They show up late, they show up tired, they show up fatigued, all the red flags, just avoided all the I'm safe pave, right? So as an instructor, we have to be prepared to deal with the circumstances in a motivation drop. So, it's one thing if it was a slip, right, and not a mistake, which we'll also get into later. I'm just really relaying all these FOIs on you guys. I'm sorry about that. But instructors have to be prepared to deal with these level drops, and it's just normal. There's going to be a lot of frustration. Maybe your check ride was scheduled 2 months out, and maybe it's the check ride month, and hey, it's going to be another month. That's going to affect motivation. It's not going to keep you motivated to study. It's not going to keep you motivated to continue to strive to learn more. Maybe you're stuck at 1,500 hours as a CFI and you're just ready to go. You're ready to fly jets for the airlines. But hey, I'm really unmotivated. I hit my 1,500 hours. Nobody's hiring. Like, you just get annoyed, right? So these are all very normal things. And it's important to just come back and really reassess and remind yourself of your own goals, right? Why have I done all this? Like, I've gone all this far and I cannot give up, right? Just keeping yourself motivated is probably the most important thing, right? Because people can tell you whatever they want, but if you're not motivated yourself, you're not a self-motivated person, it's going to be very difficult for you to succeed. So what are a couple methods that you can use to ensure that your learner will continue to work hard and continue to do their best? Well, the best things you could do is ask them about their training goals, reward them, right? So praise, present new challenges, and also occasionally remind them of their own goals and why they're doing it. And also emphasize that plateaus are totally normal, right? You'll get to a point where you can crank out those 50-degree steep bank turns all day and night. You can crank out your soft field landings day and night, but it's important to emphasize that things take time and that it's important to follow a syllabus, to stay structured, and to stay motivated. All right, so that's enough about motivation. Let's move on to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Ooh, so excited. All right, so the physiological level is the foundational level. So that's going to be the need for water, food, air, and generally, always, 99% of the time, unless you're an alien, you cannot concentrate fully on learning. If you're starving, I saw that In-N-Out on the way to the lesson today, and I didn't eat last night, and I didn't eat breakfast, and I just really need that burger. You're not going to be able to learn, right? You're going to be starving. And then water, right? You're thirsty. You probably shouldn't go up if you're not hydrated, right? Again, this all goes back to I'm safe pave, but this is just the foundational level. If you're dehydrated and you're climbing up to 8.5, 10.5, right? You're going to be even more dehydrated. Your lips are going to get dry, and your instructor's trying to teach you, hey, this is how we do this at altitude. And you're like, I need water. I can't focus, right? That's what's going to happen. And then this also ties back to shelter. So if your house caught on fire last night and you were left on the streets, you're probably not going to be too motivated to learn. Next is going to be security and belonging. I kind of like tying these two together because they kind of overlap. So, security, you feel very secure, you feel very safe at the flight school. So, a new student walks in, hey, Joe, let's walk over here and we'll meet Billy Bob. Hey, Joe, look, this is Billy Bob. Oh, Billy Bob. Hi, I'm Billy Bob. Nice to meet you, Joe. You shake their hand. You show them where the restroom is. You show them the keypad to get in and out of the hangar. You sit them down. You tell them where the coffee is. You give them a donut. And then, this all ties together, right? Security and belonging. Because if you don't belong, you feel like you don't belong, you're just an outsider, and you're not going to feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, right, you don't feel comfortable with those around you, you're not going to feel like you belong either. So that's why I like tying those two together. And, if you don't feel safe, you're not going to be concentrated on learning. Your fight or flight is probably going to be kicked on full extreme. So belonging, again, so just, you're not really ever going to have ever been in, unless, you grew up with a dad or a mom or an uncle or an aunt or somebody that closely, grew up in a hangar, maybe, you were one of those people who live in a hangar or live on an airfield, okay, maybe. But most people, they live in the city, they live in the suburbs, they live maybe a little bit in the country, it's a very abnormal environment for them to be in. So it's important that we emphasize that it is a place where they belong. Next is esteem. So humans just have a basic need for a stable, firmly based, high level of self-respect from an internal standpoint and an external standpoint. So if you don't have a high self-esteem, you think very poorly of yourself, you're gonna just feel like crap. You're not gonna want to learn, right? So, man, I'm just never gonna be able to do those steep turns. Man, those power on stalls, like I tried them once, I just can't do it. You're just gonna give up. I've heard of people who are mid-check ride and they just give up, man. And it sucks, but you can do it. You have to just be able to tell yourself, hey, you know what? I can do this. I believe in myself. You have to believe in yourself. I know you can do it. Everybody around you is probably supporting you, and if somebody's not supporting you, just ignore it. Ignore the hate that just comes with living. Hate never comes from above. Next is going to be cognitive. So you need to have a deep need to understand what's going on around you, right? If you don't care why I have to know what the best angle of climb is, you don't care to want to know why you should lean the mixture, if you don't care why you should do a magneto check, right? You're not going to want to care to learn. How are you going to learn about something you don't care about, right? I don't care about the type of wires and which wire's the positive and the negative on the magnetos or on the left magneto, or what millimeter socket I need to remove the seats. I'm just a pilot. I'm just flying the plane. I don't care. I don't want to be a mechanic. The last and final one is going to be self-actualization. So a person's need to do, and what the FAA says is that you were born to do, right? So if you don't tell yourself, I was born to be a pilot, the FAA sees that as helping a learner achieve your own individual potential in aviation. It'll offer your greatest challenge as well as the greatest reward. So essentially having the need to do, like, yes, I was born to do this, and this will motivate you to be a learner. All right, so next we're going to get into the very commonly asked defense mechanisms. You definitely have to know these, and I'm sure you as a listener right now, whether you're a student pilot, commercial pilot, ATP pilot, or 777 check airman for Alaska Airlines, I don't even know if they fly 777s, you've experienced a defense mechanism. A defense mechanism is a self-conscious self-protection reaction. You just protect your brain from an unpleasant situation, and they will generally alleviate the bad or negative feelings of something that just happened to you. So an example of that, right? So repression. So an example of that is when you put uncomfortable thoughts in inaccessible areas of the mind, right? So you just kind of shove something to the back of your head. Like you might have a fear of learning how to do stalls, so you're just going to hide that thought in the back of your head and you're just going to forget about it, right? You're just not going to think about it. Denial is the next one. So it's just denying the truth. You're just denying the reality. Like, oh, I did power on stalls and we got into a stall. And you just say, oh, no, I didn't do that, right? It's just saying that you're just denying reality. You're denying something that happened, and you're just essentially repressing that fear. You're kind of tying those two together, but you're just denying that something happened. You're unwilling to accept that said thing happened. Then compensation. This one's pretty common. I feel like a lot of us have done that. So students will sometimes tend to disguise the presence of a weak or an undesirable quality by emphasizing a more positive one, right? So, those steep turns were really bad, but you know what? My power on stalls, those were crispy. Those were on point. Those were perfect, right? I was doing my turns about a point. Those are amazing. But my S turns, yeah, they weren't that good, but you know what? Everything else was fine. So that's compensation. You're compensating one bad thing for a good one. Next, we have projection. So when you project something, it's essentially just regulating the blame. So you kind of just blame somebody else. So I failed because I had a terrible examiner. If it wasn't for air traffic controller, I probably wouldn't have, porpoised on my landing over there, right? So just projecting the blame onto somebody else. The next one's rationalization. So when you just rationalize something, you're justifying something that was honestly just completely unacceptable. So, you do something bad on the test, right? Let's just say you go and you take your, like for example, my private. I went and I took my private, and then when I got done, I was like, that was horrible. I had too short time. Like I only had an hour and 30 minutes, right? I think for the test, for the writtens. I only had an hour and a half to take my written. Like that wasn't enough time. It's the test fault. You're just rationalizing your behavior, but in reality, you just weren't prepared. You weren't ready. Next, reaction formation. So reaction formation is when you just honestly believe something other than the truth. So you truly in your mind, think, hey, I did not kick. Let's say you're doing a power on stall. You kick that left rudder, full left aileron, full power. You add flaps. I don't know. You do something weird, something freaky. And you just completely deny that you did that. You're just like, no, I didn't. I didn't do that. You just cover up that feeling. You just cover it up, and you just fake a belief. So you say, oh, well, I did something else, right? And this is not what you did at all, right? But you truly believe that. Next is fantasy. So fantasy is probably pretty common as well. It's probably up there. Is, you're joining the pattern, you're under the DFW Bravo, and, air traffic control says, 7 Whiskey Tango, traffic 3 o'clock, 777 inbound on a 240 heading towards you, right? And you look up and you see that 777, and it's super beautiful. You're like, oh, I'm going to be flying those wide bodies internationally one day. Yes, I am. Oh, yeah. But keep in mind, this entire time, your instructor's grilling you that you're about to bust the Bravo airspace, right? And he just puts you into a nose-down attitude to get you out of the Bravo. So that's an example of fantasy. You're just daydreaming, right? When you should be doing other things. And yeah, this could happen to you. I'm sure it's happened to me before. I can't really remember a time. But yeah, just don't fantasize. Think about what you're doing. It's always about staying ahead of the aircraft. And, this is a very common defense mechanism. The last thing is displacement. So it's just an unconscious shift of emotion or desire from an original object to a more acceptable, less threatening substitute. So, going home and yelling at your wife because you know that she's going to accept that, you did a failure, and she's going to soothe you, and she's going to rub your back after a lesson that you performed very poorly on. And yeah, you just displace your behavior, you displace your anger onto something else other than where they belong, rather than just correcting the mistake. So those are going to be all the defense mechanisms. So let's move on to how you as an instructor can deal with a learner that continuously uses excuses, right? So let's say you have a student and all they do is make excuses. Well, something you can say is, hey, this is what you're doing wrong, and we need to talk about it. And essentially, the main objective should be to, continue to motivate them, and also give them that self-confidence, that self-worth, that born to do feeling, and just like self-actualize them and say, hey, you can do it. I know you can do it. You've been messing it up, but I know you can do it. You did it that one time. Oh, it was so good. You nailed that landing. Butter, I didn't even know we were on the ground. You just basically restore that emotion back into the learner, and also reemphasize why they're doing it in the first place, and just, tell them you believe in them. So what are a couple emotional reactions that may inhibit learning during flight training? Well, these are going to be very common, especially with your student pilots. I'm guilty of about half of these. So anxiety and stress. Wow. Okay, so anxiety, right? You've never flown an airplane before. You don't know what the pedals do. You don't know which one's the throttle, which one's the mixture, which one pulls the airplane into a loop-de-loop. You have no idea what's going on, right? So you're gonna have a little bit of stress. As a discovery flight, oh my God, I was terrified. My instructor was like, hey, take the controls. Okay, that's the rudder, that's the brake, go. And he just put in the power, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to go in the grass. I almost went into the grass. We went up, we do power on stalls. We kicked into a spin above a lake. I thought I was gonna die. Frankly, I loved it, but we're not all like that. So anxiety and stress. So stress, there could be a lot of stress. There could be fatigue, right? So you have chronic and acute. So chronic means, maybe you haven't slept. You've slept 1 hour in the past 2 months, right? I mean, that's not really possible, but 1 hour every night for the past 2 months, that's gonna be chronic, right? It's gonna be a significantly detrimental thing to have. Versus acute, maybe you just slept on your side the previous night and you drank an energy drink too late the day before because you wanted to go to the gym at 8 p.m. with all your buddies, and you just weren't able to sleep that well. You were tossing and turning all night. So it's important that you analyze and that you understand what's going on with the learner. Next could be impatience, right? So a learner comes in, I'm ready, man. Let's get this check ride going. And they have 1 hour in the airplane of total time, and they haven't even done their solo. So, being impatient, when you get an experienced and impatient learner, it's important that you emphasize the syllabus. Hey, look, we're gonna go in stages, and you know what? I'm gonna go as fast as you want, but you have to show me that you are capable of doing this. If you want to do this, I will do it with you, right by your side. But you need to demonstrate to me that you're ready to do this and that you want to go at the pace that you're talking about. Worry or lack of interest. So like I said, again, this just goes back to motivation. So, do they want to be a pilot? Do they want to go fly for the airlines? Or are they really just, trying to get a girlfriend? Are they trying to impress somebody? Is their dad just, an airline pilot, and they're like, oh, well, my dad's a pilot, so I just want to be a pilot too. But, maybe they don't really want to be a pilot. Maybe they just don't even know what they want to do. And, it's important that they want to do that. They have a need to learn. Physical discomfort, again, this goes back to I'm safe pave, right? So if you, don't have that I'm safe pave checklist completed and, thoroughly corrected, then you're not going to be able to learn. You're not going to inhibit any learning, and, you could have some emotional reactions to that. Next is apathy. So this kind of ties into professionalism as an instructor. So, if I show up to a lesson, or you as an instructor show up to a lesson, and you're completely unprepared, you show up with your hair, squiggled because you slept on your hair, you have bad hair, and you're just wearing a dirty shirt, and, you're just not prepared. What are we doing today? Oh, I don't know, right? That's going to generate apathy. This has happened to me several times, and I can't emphasize how important it is to show up to your lessons prepared, because all it took was 1 or 2 lessons that made me absolutely turn around and go to somebody else. It was horrible. I hated it. I'm sure you've experienced it if you're listening to this, if you're an experienced pilot. I'm sure you've had that one instructor. You just show up and you're like, what are we doing? Oh, I don't know. Let's just get in the plane and fly. And you just paid them $100, $200, $300. Maybe you paid for the plane another $100, $200, $300, and you're mad. I mean, I would. I have been. It happens. So inadequate instruction. As a flight instructors, it's unacceptable to show up unprepared, and it's unacceptable to provide mediocre instruction. We are being paid, we've gone through extensive training, and it's not fair. So it's important that you do not generate apathy with the learner. Alrighty guys, so I'm back at home and I have a microphone. Hopefully it sounds better. I was using my phone earlier, but here we go. Let's continue on. So what's the definition of anxiety, and why is the learner's anxiety a concern to us as flight instructors? Well, anxiety is going to be the feeling of worry, nervousness, unease, and oftentimes about something that might happen. And it'll result from maybe just something that you've never experienced, or maybe it's just an imaginary thing that happens in your head. And generally speaking, it'll threaten the person who experienced it, and it has a very serious effect into your mental state. So now we move into stress. So what kind of reactions might somebody have from a stressful situation? Well, there's 2 that the FAA has defined. It's normal and abnormal. So a normal reaction might be, you respond rapidly and exactly to what you were trained to do, and boom, you recover. So that's something that you do rationally and you act rapidly. versus an abnormal reaction is just going to be when you do something completely inadequate. So it might be random or just totally illogical. So maybe you freeze on the controls, or you do let's do a power on stall, and instead of recovering, you're just kind of holding that back pressure back because you're like, oh my God, I'm so scared. I don't really know what's going on. I'm so anxious. And depending on the learner, maybe you might experience something else, such as maybe a mood change. Maybe they yell at you, or maybe they laugh, or they start to sing. Painstaking self-control and extreme over-cooperation is what the FAA has defined. So what are some ways to help counter this anxiety? Well, it's important to emphasize that, fears are normal, and it's something you've never experienced before, and it's totally reasonable. Anxiety can just be countered simply by reinforcing the learner's enjoyment of flying and teaching them to cope with their fears, and teach them how to maybe not get themselves into a predicament. That way that they can confide with you as an instructor that they have been adequately taught. And again, this goes back to apathy. So if a learner is anxious or stressed, or something bad happens that they maybe show a defense mechanism of, and they have generated apathy towards you, maybe they won't trust you. Maybe they just won't really feel safe flying because the instruction they were given was subpar, and they have generated apathy towards you, so they don't even want to listen to you, and they're just so stressed and they're so anxious, and they might just quit flight training altogether. So being able to understand all of the FOIs on a rote understanding, application, and correlation level is very important for the checkride, and also for expressing your thoughts. All right, so we already went over fatigue, but let's just go over briefly some symptoms of what a learner might experience when they are, going through some acute fatigue. It's generally categorized by errors. So maybe they're supposed to set up the ILS and they just don't do it. Or maybe they just have inattention. So you're telling them something and it's going in one ear and just going straight out the other. Maybe they get distracted very easily, or they just lose lack of complete situational awareness, or maybe they're just completely out of it when it comes to controlling the aircraft. Maybe they just cannot fly. So let's kind of touch on some physical discomfort. So this may be obvious to some of you, but me personally in Texas, the best example I can give are extremes of temperature. You're sitting there, you go for a lesson, middle of the day, the only time the plane is available, and you're sweating gallons of freaking sweat because it's 110 degrees out and the plane is climbing at 50 feet per minute. And that's a perfect example. Maybe you could have a minor illness, or be fatigued, or dehydration. These are all FOIs that you can relate back to each other and really just break down and explain why these things correlate. All right, so let's briefly talk about psychological defects. So it's important that when somebody has something that you notice is just off about a person, maybe it's psychological, maybe it's physiological, maybe it's physical, it's important to arrange another instructor who maybe doesn't know the learner to just conduct an evaluation flight. So it's important that you determine whether or not further investigation is to be justified. And it's important that this assessment is basically unbiased, because you don't want somebody with a biased opinion going up with somebody who might have a deficiency. And the primary responsibility is that if you have detected a learner that's suffering from a serious abnormality, it's important to refrain from instructing that learner, because this could really, really, really mess your career up. If you sign somebody off to, let's say they do their cross country, they could get into serious problems if they had some sort of psychological, physiological factor that you completely overlook and you just ignore. It could come back and bite you in case something happens, which, knock on wood, this doesn't happen, which is why we generally have two people check this person out and verify that they are good to be a safe and sound pilot. All right, so let's briefly go back to the adult learner, because I touched on it, but I didn't go fully over it. I kind of just jump around and, connect all these FOIs, which is how you should do it, but we're going to go in order here. So what's a couple methods that you can use to address the needs of an adult learner? So you want to provide a syllabus that's organized and that it's very clearly defined to help them really know what they're going through. So personally, I thought this was obvious, and a lot of these FOIs, they might be very obvious to you, but nowadays common sense is no longer common. So that's one. Helping learners integrate new ideas with what they already know. So like I said, correlating a system. So a carbureted engine that maybe they grew up ripping bolts out of, to the mighty Cessna 172 carbureted engine. Recognize the learner's need to control the pace and start and stop time. So, hey, we're going to sit down for an hour. We're going to do an hour brief, an hour flight, an hour debrief. Hopefully that's not how you're actually doing it, but that's just an example. So understand how the learner, when they need to take a break essentially, and when, hey, maybe they've plateaued and they're just good to go. Come on, let's keep going. Let's keep introducing new ideas, which is the next one I was going to touch on. Keep introducing new ideas and take advantage of the self-directed and self-designed abilities that the adult has. They're adults. They've figured out, hopefully by now, how to move out. They know how to cook their own meals. They know how to figure out their transport, their commute, hopefully change a tire. So adults have gone through a lot of life experience, and generally they are self-directed and they know what they need to do, which is why it's important to give them scenario-based training. I think this applies to everybody, but this is what the FAA has said. Also using books, maybe a online computer program, which is pretty simple for adult learners. They can access it whenever, maybe your Kings, your Sporties. I personally love Kings. Not sponsored, I wish, but they have a great platform, and I've personally used all of their courses, all of their checkride prep videos, prepware for all of my check rides. Sponsor me, please. Next is to just refrain from spoon feeding information. Okay, so this personally applies to everybody, and I have a very strong opinion about that. I will not and do not spoon feed information to anybody. I think it's very, very key to give them scenarios, make them think, make them answer questions. It's important that we, as humans, as a whole, just question and that we think and that we find information for ourselves. And personally, what my instructor did that worked extremely well for me, and I wouldn't be where I am today without it, is anytime I asked him a question, hey, this FAR, blah, 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 or what's the answer to this? He'd be like, well, where can you find it? Look it up. I think that's extremely valuable, and it's just such a great learning lesson because you learn how to find information. You know how to do things for yourself so that in the future, when you're professional, okay, well, I know where I need to find this information. I know how to find these resources. And then maybe if you're confused, obviously it's okay to ask questions. All right, so now let's move on to the 3 basic elements of communication. Okay, so it's the source, the symbols, and receiver. So I'm the source. You're listening to me speak right now. I'm the source. The symbols are the words that are coming out of my mouth, what I'm explaining to you. And the receiver, you are the receiver, the listener of who's listening to this. You can hear my tone of voice because I think this is ridiculous. But anyways, explain the 3 characteristics that instructors might understand about their learners before effective communication can take place. Okay, so this is kind of important. So the instructor has a responsibility to determine that the learner has the ability to properly communicate and understand what you're saying. Next, the attitudes the learner will exhibit will generally indicate that they have a willingness to learn, and hopefully they're pretty neutral about everything. So, they approach every single topic with the same attitude. They want to learn everything you have to say. Maybe they won't want to learn absolutely everything 100%, but, they want to, they at least understand that they have to know something. And that they have that attitude of, okay, maybe I don't want to learn how to do weight and balance calculations. Maybe my learner doesn't want to learn how to convert density altitude to pressure altitude, or maybe they don't want to correct a wind drift, or they don't care about calculating weight and balance, but you know what? They understand that they have to do it and that they have to know how to do it. And they sit down with the right attitude and they say, all right, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways. That's me when it comes to aerodynamics. Personally, maybe some of you can relate. Leave a comment down below. Next is going to be learner experience, background, educational level to determine the approach an instructor takes. So like I said earlier, we're just going back and forth. I'm going to keep doing it throughout this entire series, correlating. So when you grew up fixing an engine, I'm just going to keep going back to the same example because you're understanding what I'm saying, hopefully, is that when you grow up with a specific background, and as a learner, all learners are different. It's important to remember this fact. Everyone grew up differently. Everyone has a different educational level. Maybe some of you went to college. Maybe some of you didn't. We all have different backgrounds and different understanding about things in life. So it's important that me as an instructor, maybe if I have a student that understands motorcycle engines, it'll be maybe a little bit easier for me to explain what a spark plug does versus somebody who grew up eating Doritos and playing on their iPad all day and has no idea what I'm talking about to begin with. Maybe I have to give them a lighter, shallower approach and just kind of introduce everything from a foundation, a ground up experience. All right, so we're going to start getting into the barriers of effective communication. So there's an acronym the FAA has defined, which is confusion, overuse of abstractions, interference, and lack of common experience. So confusion. Confusion is what the FAA defines as confusion between the symbol and the symbolized object. So generally speaking, when I say, hey, yeah, so you can relate this engine to a motorcycle crankshaft, and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? So the words do not represent the same thing to different people. So maybe they just don't understand. They're just confused, right? What does confusion mean? They don't understand what we're talking about. Overuse of obstructions. So I keep saying that wrong. Overuse of abstractions. Abstractions are when you say something that is very broad and not very specific, right? And it's important that we are specific, that we're objective rather than subjective when we're teaching. So let's say we are coming into land in the pattern and you mess up. Let's say you mess up your downwind, your base, and your final. And when you get on the ground, you say, hey, that pattern wasn't that good. Or you say, that downwind could have been better. Like, okay, what are we talking about? We're being very abstract. You can't really explain I can't get an image of what I did wrong. So it's important that you understand what you're talking about. Another thing is maybe you say, oh, well, we're talking about a Boeing 737-800 NG. And you're like, what are you even talking about when you're trying to explain the fuselage of a Cessna 172? So they have no idea what you're talking about because you're trying to explain something and it's just too abstract. Next is interference. So interference is just going to be the prevention of a process or activity from being carried out how it's supposed to. So let's say you're trying to teach them something, but somebody next door is going crazy because they drink too much coffee and they're banging on the walls and they're banging their head on the table or they're screaming, right? Hopefully this doesn't happen at your flight school, but that's generally what a distraction is. There's just a distraction somewhere. It's interference. Next, we have lack of common experience. Now, me personally, I think I suffered with this the most when it comes to learning how to teach, how to be a flight instructor. So me as a commercial pilot, man, I get in that airplane, I know what I'm doing. So they're like, okay, checklist, okay, power, mixture, flaps, check, we're ready to go, come on. Now, the problem with that when you're teaching is that if you don't explain why we're putting the throttle where it goes, why we're leaning the mixture or enriching the mixture, what the mixture does, what the flaps do, why we put a flaps down 10 for soft field takeoff, why we're doing absolutely everything we do. It's very, very, very important that as an instructor, you explain everything because if you don't, that can generate, again, apathy. It could generate stress. It could trigger anxiety because the student's sitting there and they don't know anything. They've just joined this new world and you're just doing all this stuff because you're a commercial pilot. You just got your flight instructor certificate and you're like, all right, boom, 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 boom. It can really stress students out. So see what I'm doing? I'm coming back to that for whys. Yeah. So lack of common experience. So they have no idea what you're doing. It's the single greatest barrier to effective communication, and it can only be effective if what you're talking about is relevant to the learner. So let's go over ways to develop that instructional communication skill. So the best way that I personally learned was role playing. So instructional communication is usually done by role playing what you're doing as an instructor. So monkey see, monkey do. We'll get into that later, but I think that's the best way that I learned outside of, performance based. So what I was doing was I would say, okay, Mr. Instructor, I need you to show me how to do this. So we're doing steep turns. All right. So we do our ABCD checklist, and then we're going to crank the plane to the left. We're going to lose that lift, 2 clicks of trim, and then add a little bit of power, and just hold the nose on the horizon. Okay. Easy enough. Show me how to do it, right? So monkey see, monkey do, role playing, that ties into that. Then it's just instructional communication. So making sure that the learner has actually received and retained the knowledge. So learning has not occurred if a change in behavior has not been experienced by the learner. That's the definition of when learning has taken place. When the learner changes their behavior to the correct, way of doing it, Next is listening. It's important that we listen. I don't know why so many people just cannot do this nowadays. I don't know what it is. It's important that you listen. You can also improve the learner's experience by teaching them how to listen. So, for example, let's say they're just not listening to what you're saying. You can kind of break down what it is that you're saying, or say, hey, is there something I'm saying? Maybe you're not understanding a word I'm saying. Maybe I'm using the word vertical component of lift. And he just hasn't learned that. He just has no idea what I'm talking about, right? So being able to listen and kind of hear back everything. Don't be a parrot and yap the whole time. Maybe for your CFI checkride, you might have to, but just as an instructor, it's important to understand what the learner is going through, what's going on in their head. Listen to what they have to say. Next is going to be instructional enhancement. So it's important that we as instructors always learn. We always keep up with new information, new regs, new training, new ACS changes. Maybe, hey, this is the way I was taught this thing. So, but guess what? There's a new and improved, better way to learn how to do this. So let me show you how to do that. So what are some techniques that you can do to listen better? So I don't know. I'm pretty chill about that. I can listen to people talk all day, but don't interrupt, don't judge, and really think about what they're saying before you answer. Maybe ask them to rephrase something if you just don't know what they're asking. Be close enough to hear and just try and concentrate on what they're saying, and also try to identify any underlying feelings, any emotions that are coming from them. Maybe they're asking a question because they're freaking scared. Maybe they're asking a question because, they really are interested in knowing this, and it makes them happy to know the answer to this. All right. So thank you guys for making it to the end of this. If you did make it, please make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe to keep this algorithm pumping and this information coming out to everybody. Again, I am a Yahoo on YouTube. This is all entertainment purposes only. I have no idea what I'm talking about. This is literally all AI. You're not even listening to a real human being right now. And that was Fundamentals of Instruction, Effects of Human Behavior and Communication on the Learning Process. I'll see you guys in the next one shortly. Peace.